Hi, I'm Swampfox Mike, and this video is a head-to-head battle between our Blade 1X Prism scope and our brand new Liberator II dot sight. Both of these optics serve the same role. They're both close-quarter specialists dedicated to fast sight acquisition with high precision, from spitting distance out to no more than 200 yards or so. But the technologies that these two optics use, the approach that they take to solve that same problem, is quite different. So, while I will be focusing specifically on our Blade versus our Liberator II in particular, this video is also going to answer a lot of questions about what the difference is between 1X Prism scopes and dot sights in general, so stick around. We'll start with the brand new Liberator II, which has just been released. Now, the original Liberator was the first Swampfox optic product to be launched, and it's well proven now, but we saw an opportunity to update it and improve its specifications without increasing the price very much at all. Liberator 2 features state-of-the-art emitters that give us over 3 times the battery life of the original Liberator. On top of that, we also added in the shake and wake motion sensing illumination that our customers already know from Liberty, Justice, Sentinel, and our Blade and Tri-Hawk Prism scopes. So again, after 4 hours without movement, the optic shuts off the illumination to save battery life. As soon as you pick it up, bam, the unit wakes up and immediately returns to the previously set brightness level. You don't have to push any buttons, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Liberator 2 has 2 night vision compatible brightness levels, that's a first for us in red dots, and 8 daylight visible levels. At first they will be available in red, and then a little bit later we are also going to add green illumination. This one's a green prototype and I love it. These are very nicely daylight bright. They're fast to acquire even in bright sunlight, but they are also only 2 MOA in size, so the dot only covers up 2 inches of target at 100 yards. It's a really sharp and tight dot in your sight picture. More on that later. Now, I want to show you how Liberator 2 is built. I've got a cutaway here showing a top-down view. We're looking at it from the top here. A red dot is really a very simple thing. All you need is something that emits light, an LED emitter, pointed at a partially reflecting piece of curved glass to reflect the light back towards your eye. You can see the emitter here is on the left side of the scope, and the lens is curved to reflect that emitted light towards your eye. That's why when you look at the red dot, the front glass always appears tilted. The light is going to reflect off of it like a pool ball bouncing off the wall of a pool table. Think about it. If the front glass was just flat and straight, that light would hit the opposite wall of the scope. It would never reach your eye. Now, when you do the math right, your LED light emitter is located at the focal point of that curved piece of glass, so it will stay in focus, appearing to be focused at infinity in front of you when you look through the glass. And that's it. That's all there is to a red dot at a bare minimum. The style with just the one piece of glass up front is called an open reflex sight. You guys know what those are. That's what our pistol dots are. Liberty, Justice, Kingslayer, and Sentinel. Or you can put more glass in front and behind the reflector, and you can create a closed emitter dot sight, which is larger and heavier, but also stronger and easier to keep clean. That's what Liberator 2 is. What's important to understand here is the front and rear glass windows are not really lenses. They don't bend or manipulate the light passing through them at all, and there is no physical etched reticle housed inside it by a separate piece of glass. That means you need that LED emitter to be turned on and emitting light, or you have nothing to aim with at all. That's the bad news. If your battery conks out, your red dot is worthless. It must be turned on and supplied with electrical power to give you something to aim with. The good news is, because the light isn't being manipulated or altered at all as it passes through the red dot, you can still use iron sights positioned around the optic as normal as an emergency backup sighting system. This is called co-witness, and it's been pretty standard on red dot equipped rifles for the last 20 years or so. Now, here's how it works.
Okay, there's our green dot sight picture. Green dot in the target area, and life is good. It's springtime in Texas, and the birds are chirping when suddenly your battery conks out. Dun dun dun. So 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, conk. We have a dead battery now. So what do? We focus on the front sight like a good front sight shooter does. Dun 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 dun. Thank you, camera. And flip up the rear. Voila. We are ready to shoot iron sights, no problem. The light's coming straight through the red dot. There's no bending of the light. There's no actual lenses that are bouncing the light around inside. It's a straight shot for the light. There's no parallax setting. There's actually no eye relief. I can put my eye anywhere I want to, anywhere I need to with these iron sights, and still shoot those iron sights just as if the dot was not there at all. That's the advantage of a red dot, or in this case, a green dot sight.
Liberator 2 comes with two mounts in the box, a low mount and a riser mount. In the co-witness video, I was using the included riser mount on this AR-15, and you can see I got an absolute co-witness, where the iron sights are located right in the middle of the optics field of view. The scope body on Liberator 2 is compatible with industry standard microdot mounts, so if you want, you can get an aftermarket lower 1/3 style co-witness mount, which shifts the optic up a little bit higher and places the backup iron sight picture further down. That's totally a matter of personal preference. I just want you guys to know that a lower 1/3 co-witness is not hard to accomplish with Liberator 2 if you want. Now I want to shift gears and talk about one of my favorite optics we make, the Blade 1x25 Prism Scope. 25 means the objective lens diameter is 25 millimeters wide. Liberator 2 has a 22 millimeter lens. Blade is much bigger than Liberator 2, and it also weighs much more, 13 ounces compared to just 3.5 ounces for the red dot. Some of that weight comes from Blade's built-in mount, but a lot of it comes from the glass. There's a lot of glass inside, including the Prism assembly itself, which is basically like two glass wedges that are facing each other. Let's take a look at what one of our prisms looks like. Again, from the top angle looking down, I've got another diagram for you here. Okay, so you can see the light comes in through the objective lens on the right side of the diagram. It gets focused, and then it hits the prism, and then, witchcraft! Sorcery! Actually, math. If you pause the video and you really study this diagram, you'll see that the prism assembly is actually split into two lenses, the mirror prism and the roof prism. And one of the things that happens is the prism is responsible for flipping the image so it will be the correct side up once the light hits your eye. And it also has to do that without changing handedness. Otherwise, instead of upside down, everything would look backwards when you look through the scope. So obviously there's a lot going on here, but the point that I want to make, I want you to remember that the Prism scope has an etched reticle that is physically located inside the scope on its own piece of glass right there in the middle where the reticle housing is labeled. That's not dependent on battery power at all. That reticle is always there, no matter what. And that brings us to a question that we often get a lot at Swampfox headquarters. Hey, can you co-witness iron sights through the Blade 1X Prism? And my answer when people ask this is always, well, why do you want to? The reason we care about co-witness with a dot sight is because we need something to aim with in an emergency situation in case the battery conks out, right? Well, if the battery conks out in the 1X Prism scope, you still have the etched reticle to aim with and you're all good. So here's my old Blade that's on my SBR that I just showed you. And you can see that the illumination is green on this one. My reticle is sharp, the target area is sharp, and the front side is fuzzy. That's going to be important. Remember that in a minute. Unexpectedly, I'm shooting like this when the big CR123A battery conks out. Oh no. Anyway, the result is this. The reticle turns from green to black. That's it. In the vast majority of situations, you can still aim with great speed and precision using the reticle in black instead of green. There's no need to deploy emergency iron sights because this isn't an emergency. But we still have people asking all the time about whether you can co-witness iron sights through the 1X Prism scope even so. And so in the name of internet argumentation, let's just try it and see what happens.
Can I co-witness through a 1X Prism scope? Well, let's find out. I mean, technically, yes. The big aperture's up, and these iron sights are sighted in for this rifle. I focus on the front side, I look through there, and aha! I have an iron sight picture. Except you'll notice that the target is fuzzy now because I'm focused on my front sight like a good iron sight shooter. Except now I've got this optic that's in the way, in between the front sight and the rear sight, with the light bouncing around 11 different ways and getting flipped by the prism assembly and all that stuff before it actually hits the rear aperture and then my eye. You'll notice that even though these iron sights are sighted in and the prism scope is also sighted in, the prism scope reticle, which is still there and annoyingly kind of in the way, doesn't line up with my iron sights. That's a clue that we have a parallax nightmare on our hands. I can hit with this prism scope exactly where I aim right now. So how come those iron sights aren't lined up? Well, because the front iron isn't where the scope thinks it is. It's not where your eye thinks it is when you look through the scope. Because this thing has a focus, a parallax, set at 100 yards, not at 6 inches. The front sight is 6 inches in front of the scope. Of course, it's not going to be in proper focus. Of course, it's not going to be where you think it is, because the focal point of where the optic is looking is 100 yards away. So my question is, like, all right, technically, yes, internet, I got an iron sight picture through my 1X Prism scope. When would this be desirable? What problem does this solve? That this is a feature that we want to sell and put on our website and say, haha, our Prism scopes co-witness with iron sights. Why would you do this? What's the situation where you have a problem and this sight picture is your solution? I don't get it.
Okay, so that pretty much settles it on co-witness iron sights. A great idea and easily workable with Liberator II red dot. Not such a great idea, but also not really needed on the Blade 1X Prism scope. And that brings us to another question that we get very frequently. Hey, what about putting a 3x magnifier behind these things? Let's start with Liberator 2. So here's Liberator 2 at 1x, and I'm looking at some steel targets 200 yards away. There are 3 targets in a row, and I'm aimed at the gong on the right. I'm using the classic 50/200 yard battle sight 0, so the gun is dead on at 200 yards. All I have to do is put the 2 MOA green dot right where I want to hit. No holdover, no worries. The problem is, that's an 8-inch gong 2 football fields away, so just seeing the target well enough to get a good sight picture is a real challenge for me. To help myself out, I have a Vortex 3X Micro flip-to-side magnifier mounted directly behind the green dot. And I just reach up with my support hand and flip it into position behind the Liberator 2, like this. The 3x magnifier is basically a very small 3x prism scope with the reticle part deleted, and sure enough, now that target array looks 3 times closer than it did before. Adding a 3x magnifier means now I have to worry about eye relief, an eye box, parallax distance, and all that stuff just like with any other prism scope. So I have lost that freedom of head movement that I had when I was shooting just with the Liberator 2 all by itself. Now I'm looking through 2 scopes which are aligned with each other, so my head needs to be in a pretty specific position in order to get my sight picture and make hits. But it's totally worth it. Making 200-yard hits with the magnifier in place is so much easier than doing it with just the green dot Liberator 2 by itself at no magnification. I absolutely love the dot sight plus magnifier combo. It's great. Can we do the same thing with the Blade 1X Prism? Well, doing that is kind of like the old Pimp My Ride show. Yo dog, I heard you like prism scopes, so we put a prism scope with your prism scope, so you can eye relief while you eye relief. Well, as you might guess, this really isn't going to work out super well, but dang it, people keep asking us about this, so while I was at the range, I did my level best to make it work.
Okay, so let's say that I've been shooting this rifle and I want to put a 3x magnifier behind my blade just to make it easier to shoot out at say 100, 150 yards. So I've already got the blade mounted up all the way at the very front of the receiver because I know what's going to happen here. In real life, I actually have it mounted further to the rear because of how I like to run my stock. But let's say we wanted to make space for the 3x magnifier. Now I've got a Vortex Micro 3x magnifier here. This is behind Liberator 2, and you can see it works great like that. It's right behind it. So it's on a QD mount. We'll just pull that sucker off there like that. And we'll put it on right here, and it's going to sit behind the blade just like that, right? Wrong. That is not going to work. Because blade, being a prism scope, has an eye relief of 3.8 inches. Your eye needs to be about 4 inches behind this thing in order to see through it, right? Well, so does a magnifier. Magnifier is going to have to be about 4 inches behind blade in order for the magnifier to see through it properly. And that means, even without this rear iron sight, there's no way that it's going to fit on an AR-15 receiver. We need something with a much longer receiver, like, like this 308 battle rifle. I put the blade on the front of the receiver of this FNFAL, which leaves us plenty of room to put the 3X Micro back here on the rear of the receiver and have about 3.8 inches between the two of them. So now I've got proper eye relief figured out, and the only thing that's left to do is adjust my ocular, because I have this one set in the middle of the range, and this one is set for my eye, but it's not the same thing. My eye is not at the same focal length as the 3X magnifier. So I'm going to look through it real quick while Davy Crockett shoots his black powder in the background. Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. Okay, and hey, there we go. I've finally got my ocular adjusted, and I have a crisp reticle here, and I have 3X magnification here, and ta-da! Told you, internet, you can make a 3X magnifier work behind a Blade 1X Prism. So there. Here's the problem. Let's say that I get done shooting a 3X, and now I want to go back to 1X. Alright, so flip the 3X magnifier over to the side, crank, 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 crank. Let's say I put an index mark here to remind me of where I need to go. Alright, cool. And I cannot see through the Blade 1X because it's twice as far away as it should be from my eye. It's alright, I can fix it. I'm going to roll the gun over, and I'm going to put my eye behind. Well, the magnifier's getting in the way again because my head needs to be where the magnifier is. It's not working. This is just clown shoes. I can choose 3X, thank you Davey, or I can choose 1X, but with a 1X prism scope, I can't switch back and forth between the two of them like I could with the red dot. This is a terrible setup.
So once again, technically yes, it is possible to make a 3X magnifier work behind a 1X prism scope if we're just arguing about what's possible on the internet. Is it a setup that I would actually want to spend my own money on and put on any of my actual rifles in real life? No. When you choose a 1X prism scope like Blade, you're really committing to a true zero magnification sight picture at all times, and quite frankly, we knew that when we designed it. That's why Blade features the BRC close quarters reticle with its holds at 5, 10, and 15 yards compensating for height over bore, instead of a BDC type reticle that could potentially help you with holds past 200 yards. If you're trying to shoot at 200 yards and beyond, the truth is the Blade 1X is just not the best tool for that job. If you do prefer an etched reticle, say because of astigmatism, but you want something that you can easily flip back and forth between 1X and 3X, then I have great news for you. There's another class of optics that do that. They are called low power variables. LVPOs don't just go from 1 to 3, they go from a true 1X down low to 6, 8, or even 10 power magnification, all in the same scope body. You don't need to line up two scopes behind each other, it's all just built right in. You are going to wind up spending more money, and you're going to wind up paying a price with greatly increased size and weight too, but a quality low power variable like our Arrowhead here is a much, much better solution than trying to jury rig a 3X magnifier behind a 1 power prism scope. And that's all I'm going to say about that, Lieutenant Dan. So, it seems like Liberator II is beating up on Blade pretty bad. I mean, you can't co-witness iron sights through the Blade, you can't use a 3X magnifier through the Blade, it weighs more, it costs more. This video's a slam dunk for Liberator II, right? Well, maybe. I mean, if you gotta have co-witness and a 3X magnifier and that's your game, I think your mind's probably made up already. But I just said a dirty word a second ago. Did you catch it? Astigmatism. Medically speaking, there are a couple different types of astigmatism, but they all involve imperfections in how the cornea or lens of your eye is shaped. People who have astigmatism have issues with seeing the collimated light of a red dot. I have astigmatism, and when I look through a red dot, I never actually see just a plain crisp red dot. I either see a comet with a tail, or a sort of starburst glare surrounding the dot. I'll just show you. All the photos that I usually show you guys in these videos, looking through our scopes, are true photos, just an iPhone behind the scope, except for the two I'm about to show you now. I made these in Photoshop. Disclaimer, the dot is bigger than it really would be. Just trying to prove my point here. This is more or less what a person with normal vision sees when they look through a red dot. It's a crisp, round dot, right? But for me, when I look through a red dot with my eyes, this is what I see every time. See the difference? It's not as precise. There are streaks of light that dance around, lots of artifacts around the dot itself. For me, it's not that bad. I'm happy to use red dots anyway. I use them on my pistols. I can turn the brightness level down a notch or two, and that helps reduce the effects of my astigmatism if I need to do that. But some folks aren't that lucky. Instead of seeing one dot with some annoying artifacts like I do, I've had guys tell me they see a whole cloud of specks or a starburst glare with no central aiming point at all. For these shooters, a red dot is just not going to work for them, and that's the end of the competition. The Prism's etched reticle, physically contained on a piece of glass in front of your eye, is the only way to go if your astigmatism is that bad. So for these shooters, the Blade is the clear winner, and we really want Blade to work with almost any shooter's vision. It was a huge priority for that product. Along with that fast focus adjustable ocular in the back, we even have blades available in amber illumination at the request of colorblind shooters who can't use red or green. If you're colorblind, grab an amber blade. You're going to love it. So back to red dots. How can you tell if you have astigmatism or if you just have a screwed up factory defect red dot? Well, there are a couple of different ways. The first way is take your cell phone's camera, focus it on a distant object, say 20 yards or more away, lock the phone camera's focus, and then take a photo of the sight picture looking through the unit. If your phone camera sees a crisp brown dot but your eyes don't, that's a pretty big clue. But you have to focus the camera at a distance first. If you just focus on the scope in front of you, the dot's going to look like a giant basketball, and that's not really useful. Why? Because a collimated light optic focuses at infinity, so having your camera focused at the scope body 4 inches in front of the camera is not going to work. The second method is to rotate the scope around in a circle while you're looking through it. You don't need a camera at all. If those artifacts, the streaks, and the glare, if they all rotate too, something might be wrong with your optic. You might want to check that the glass is clean. But if you can rotate it around and the artifacts don't change, well, it's because the cornea of your eye isn't rotating and the way that it perceives that light isn't changing. You've got astigmatism. At that point, you can either say, screw it and keep shooting, or you can try the Prism option. Finally, the etched reticle has another advantage over the collimated light reticle. I want to talk about it. For one thing, we are able to effectively and affordably construct etched reticles with advanced features like Blade's bullet rise compensating reticle. It is much more precise and sharp than trying to create a similar BRC type reticle in a red dot. We've tried. While there are some red dots out there that do have multiple holes built into them, most shooters agree that a simple dot or a simple circle dot is the best call for collimated light technology. The complexity limit for red dots is just so much lower than etched reticles. So if you're okay with just a simple point and shoot solution with a single point of aim for every situation, a 2 MOA or 3 MOA dot is going to get the job done just fine for you. If you're looking to add some extra reticle capability while you're looking through the optic, then the Prism is the way to go. So which one is right for you? Let's stack up the factors side by side. Here we go with the final diagram of this video.
So which one is right for you? Let's stack up the factors side by side. Here we go. Liberator II is only 3.5 ounces and Blade is 13.1 ounces. So Liberator II weighs about 25% as much as the Blade does, and that's a significant difference in weight. Remember the diagrams, how much more glass is inside the Prism scope compared to the red dot. It's much more complex, and there are a lot more parts to pay for hiding in there too. So when we compare prices, you're looking at about $100 more for the Blade. How significant is $100 to you? I do not know, but I have to admit that at this price point, it's a significant percentage of the total cost of the optics that we're comparing in front of us. Red dots don't have an eye box or an eye relief or any of those restrictions on where your head goes behind the unit, as long as you can see the dot. If you can see the red dot or the green dot looking through the tube, you can shoot and you can get hits. Blade's eye box and eye relief are very, very forgiving, and it's still an extremely fast to acquire sight picture, but it does have eye box and eye relief limitations. Also, as I've demonstrated in this video, co-witness and 3x magnifier use isn't really helpful with a 1x Prism at all, so if you want to do those things, then the Prism sight's not going to be for you. On the other hand, you don't need to co-witness either, because Blade has that etched reticle that Liberator II does not have. Losing battery power is no big deal with a Prism scope, but if it happens with a red dot sight, well, it's game over. Time to deploy those iron sights.
Moving on, astigmatism is no problem at all when you're using the Blade 1X Prism scope, but depending on your eyes, it can be anything from a minor annoyance to a major deal breaker with Liberator II. Finally, that etched reticle allows us to offer advanced features that we just can't do in a red dot right now. And that's where the balance is struck. Guys, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Do you agree with me or did I miss something? If you liked this video and you stuck it out to the end, subscribe to our channel because there's a lot more still to come this year. Hey, put that camera away. No one's supposed to see this yet.